lots of things come to mind when you're speaking. Couple of things popped into my mind. Is one where you said that sort of law is primordial in some ways. Yeah, I absolutely think so. I think the thing that sets us apart from the animals, from the beasts, are things like language, tool making, and then law. Right, I'm
Yeah.
an ancient historian first and foremost. That's my actual background is ancient history. And of course, you look at
Oh,
things like the Code of Hammurabi or the Laws of Solon or whatever it is. Right,
yeah.
it's what sets us apart from being just merely hunter gatherers. The way
Yes.
what you said it absolutely set my imagination alight. Where you say it's what allows us to live together.
Yes.
Right, it's what allows us to live in any sort of collective where it isn't just purely some sort of biker gang.
Yes.
Right. So yeah,
Yeah.
no, law is absolutely primordial. The other thing is what I think is very interesting that you were saying, the idea that when you've got a giant state or even some sort of nanny state or some sort of all-powerful centralised government, is that actually lowers civilization in all sorts of ways. The first thing that sprung to my mind is in China, during the sort of the height of the Maoist period, in the sort of Great Leap Forward or the Cultural Revolution period, or even to some extent still today, where the government, the party, is sort of so all powerful, they're supposed
Mm.
to provide absolutely everything for you. I'm talking not nowadays so much, but back in the 50s or 60s in China, that people would quite often, you had no property, there was no private
Mm.
property, everything was owned by the state. So at the end of the day of work, people would just literally drop their tools where they stood and walk away
Yeah.
because it's not theirs, it's not their property.
Yeah.
If that tool then rusts on the ground in the field, well, the idea at least in principle is the state will give you a new one, right? And so in terms like that, civilization is at a very low ebb. The opposite, of course, is that when you have property, when the state isn't involved in you and what you own and what you do, then you've got a real motive in order to make it work. So
Yes.
yeah, everything you're saying is absolutely ringing true with me. The worry is, of course, that before we end up in a place like that, what you described, where there's lots of sort of native or British enclaves that are sort of by working together through cooperating together through strictly means of just deliberately choosing to. There's no
Yeah.
coercion in any way.
Yeah.
Um, that's still a fair ways off, unfortunately. I feel like, um, there's lots of processes, there's lots of stages between where we are today and a world like that. Um,
Yes.
do you think
Well,
there's lots more stages to go yet?
yes. I think I would say you're talking timescales in a way then. There. Yeah. Or what?
Yeah. So I'm wondering where you see us going in sort of the immediate future, in the next few years, or in the next, say, 10, 15, 20 years. Do you think things might collapse, the collapse you describe and talk about? Do you think that might happen actually quite quickly and not that far in the future? What's your feelings
Yeah.
and thoughts on that?
The date that I've put on it, and I might risk making a fool of myself here, is about sometime around the end of this decade, so around 2030, maybe early 2030s. I think we're
Not that
like,
long away in the scheme of things, in other words.
no, not that long away. The thing is, because I'm saying this, um, it's no good just to say it'll happen one day, because everything will happen one day. It needs to have a timeline on, and that's the timeline I've chosen. I think I risk things always take longer than you think they're going. It's always twice as always set a timeline, so double the money and double the timescale. So uh, it could be twice that, but so far, I mean, I thought I set that timescale for myself. I don't know, 5 years ago, maybe a bit more, no, a bit more than that. And so far, I don't see any reason to draw back from that because the the crux point is when historically, from my reading, is when the the annual deficit of the government hits 20% of GDP. So it's not the size of the debt, it's annual deficit, overspend every year. So that was the case with the Soviet Union. It was the case with Latin American dictatorships when the governments kept falling over in the 80s and 90s in Latin America. Also with the inflations of Central Europe in the middle of the last century, when the state deficit hits 20% of GDP, that is when society becomes ungovernable. And really, I mean, simple terms, suddenly everyone says, I'm not working in this council office anymore. They haven't got the money to pay me. And the way I put it is the window cleaner at the council's offices, he'll suddenly say, I'm not doing this on invoice. You've got to pay me up front. And the local council say, we haven't got the money to pay you up front. And he said, well, if give you an invoice, I don't think you'll have the money then either. So I'm not doing it. I'm not cleaning your windows. And it gets, and you just get into a tailspin.
A systems collapse.
Yeah, a system, and yeah, feedback loop system. That's the word I've been looking for all this time. System, yeah, accelerated by public anger and violence because we are a decadent people. We have become decadent. We think that it is welfare is like rain that just distills out of the atmosphere, and it should. It's always been that way, and it always will be. And it's like oxygen to us. And when it goes, we will react the way we would if someone tried to cut off our oxygen supply. And so I think that will accelerate that system's collapse. The date, people are probably going to, come the 2030s, people are probably going to look at me and say, well, you got it wrong, it hasn't happened yet. Like I'm the cult leader saying that the world's going to blow up in, on 8 o'clock on Thursday morning.
Yeah.
But it's, I'm still sticking with that timetable because it looks about right. I think that state finances are a damn sight worse than they're letting on. So,
yeah. So just to follow up then on that idea of systems collapse, that's also something I sort of think about fairly regularly. There's an old 1970s or I think maybe early 80s set of documentaries called Connections by James Burke. I don't know if you've ever seen that or watched it back in the day.
Yes.
It's absolutely superb. If anyone's out there, go if you can find it. Connections. And anyway, he talked a lot about something that was sort of underpinning all of it in a way was this idea of systems collapse. And he was talking about that, as I say, even in the late 70s, early 80s, that you could have something like one small example he talked about. I think it was in the very first episode of the first season of it, is that you could have some sort of circuit breaker could go down in New York City, and it has some sort of feedback loop of causing in the end a giant power outage for a whole city, and suddenly all underground trains come to a halt. Even hospitals suddenly don't have power, literally like that, because one small part of a giant interconnected system goes down. But if you talk about that on a societal level, not just on a city level, or even on a global scale, that one small thing fails, and then, for example, what the worrying one is sort of power or food supplier chains, is that suddenly your local Tesco's or Sainsbury's or Waitrose or Lidl or even the corner shop, wherever it is, wherever you source your food from, within a few days or within a week or two, they're not getting any more physical food in, and you've got no way to get access to food, right? Yeah. And if you don't know someone who owns an allotment, or you're unable to work an ancient style plough, you haven't got any land, you don't know how to yoke a horse or an ox, you don't know how to work an ancient unpowered plough, you can't work the land. So suddenly millions of people, really suddenly, within days or even a few weeks or a couple of months at most, millions of urban people are looking straight down the barrel of starving to death because they can't buy food from Tesco's anymore. Simple as that. And again, in the past, you look at historically, things like that can happen very quickly, very, very quickly. It didn't seem like that something like that was on the horizon, and now it is, and now it's here, it's with us. And all this is, I say all that, to lead into the idea how this plays into our invasion and foreign enclaves and everything we've been talking about so far in this conversation. It could happen, whether it's 5 years from now, 50 years from now. If and when that happens, it will probably, in fact, it's more likely to happen quickly. Do you think so?
Yeah, very. And the fun one to think about is London. What's the population of Greater London? Is it 10 million? Maybe more.
More Greater London, isn't it? More. I think it's more. Sorry.
It might be 50.
It's a
I don't
giant
maybe.
metropolis. It's one of the biggest cities in the world, right? London. It's in the top 10 or 20 biggest cities in the world.
Yeah, and it's full of the 57 varieties, and all with their own gangs and their own identities, all with claims to turf. And let's suppose you don't need to go so far as James Burt. You don't need to have a collapse of electricity or anything. Just suppose there's a breakdown of law somehow. Say you're getting, say the Southport riots spread around the country, and the police are all occupied with that, or no one's getting sent, or the courts break down or something. Then how long is it going to take for those supermarkets to get looted bare?
Yeah,
20
right.
minutes? 20 minutes probably.
Look at the LA riots. Sorry,
Sorry?
go ahead. I'll just say, look at the LA riots. In fact, there's lots and lots of examples of that, something like that happening. Law breaks down briefly, a small window of time, and everything's looted like a
Yeah.
plague of locusts immediately. Sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead. Continue, please. Sorry.
And if you get a breakdown of law, then no one has any food in London. I mean, it's a food desert, and people might have a couple of meals worth in their cupboards. Then within a short space of time, you get a lot of conflict, and it could really, I'd say, could be very, very nasty, sort of multipolar, um, all against all, multipolar conflict, and that it's not very. And then let's suppose the Tesco lorry wants to battle its way through to bring food in. It's going to get hijacked.
Sure.
And then, so are there enough soldiers to ride shotgun on every Tesco, Lidl, Sainsbury's, Waitrose, every supermarket lorry? Probably not. It's not our job to ride shotgun on supermarket lorries. And then that that I think backs up my point about ethnic separation. In those circumstances, I think people will say, I'm in a desperate situation here. Who can I trust and rely on, not only for safety, for security, but also just to help me survive? I think you'll see people very quickly flying back to the people they instinctively trust, going back to well, the sense of primal trust. Who can I? It's who looks like me. Historically, that's how you tell who you can trust.